with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. And today I want to show you a project that I just completed off camera. And the reason why I didn't do a video on it was because I was in a big hurry. This guy wanted this turned around pretty quickly, but I'd like to share the finished product with you and show you what he wanted and what I ended up with. And then we're also going to start a new knife sheath project today. So I'll pull you in here closer and show you what I got going on, and we'll get started. Alright, so the first thing that I want to share with you is at the InCal's convention, I got an order for this holster. It's for a Remington black powder. It is a reproduction black powder pistol, percussion cap, and the guy that ordered this brought this older holster in, and he bought the gun off of a guy that wanted to keep the holster. I don't know if he has another one like it or what, but he wants the holster, so he loaned it to him so he could get one made. So he ordered an identical replica of that holster. So here's the original one, and here's the one that I produced off of that. So here's the original one, here's the reproduction, and you can see how well it fits in there. Fits great. So it gives you a little bit different look to it. You can see here where I did some wet forming to it so that the cylinder fits in there real nice and snug, but it's easy to draw, easy to holster. And here's the original one again. So I think he's going to be super happy with that. Let me get those out of the way. And then the project we're going to start today is a knife sheath for this knife. It's a beautiful knife, handmade in Germany, and this guy wants a knife sheath made for this. He bought this when he was in the Army and was stationed in Germany. So, and that's been back in the 70s. So he just now got around to getting me to make him a sheath for it. So the first thing I did was I took the knife and I made a pattern, and this is what I ended up with. And then you can see that I marked on my pattern front, drew an arrow up to show where that front piece goes, and then the back is this, also includes the strap that goes on the belt, and then this is also going to have a spacer in it. So I also wrote up here this side up for spacer. Then what I did was I went ahead and cut 3 pieces of leather, and then I put my pattern on it and kind of dry fit it so that I know which side's which. I actually put it on my side so I could make sure the leather was facing the right direction on the inside and the outside, and then I marked them. So like, that's my spacer piece. Here's the piece for the back, and here's the piece for the front. So I cut those out, dry fit them with the pattern, and then marked on those which one's which, just so I didn't get them messed up. Worst thing that can happen, and I've done it before, it happens, trust me, is that you lay your pattern down, you draw it out on the leather, you cut it out, and then you get ready to move on to the next step, and you realize you've cut it on the wrong side. So your finished side is where the rough side should be, and vice versa. So sometimes that becomes a problem. So let's go ahead. I'll do the front and the back because I only have this one pattern. I'll do the front and the back, and then I can actually either cut this out where the spacer goes, or I can just measure it off of here. And that's just, I believe it's a 1/4 inch spacer is what I've allowed for. Yeah, it's a 1/4 inch. So I can do either or. We'll see as we move on here. But I'm going to do the front first. And I'll just lay that pattern on there. And I'm going to outline it. And again, I am using a ballpoint pen. I find out, this is just my personal opinion, it just seems like, I imagine a lot of guys out there would cringe if they saw me doing this, but it just marks on there so smooth, and it's just a cheap, one of them giveaway cheap pens, but it works great. And I'm going to bevel these anyway, so it's going to take that ink mark off. So I'll go ahead and draw my line across. And there's my front outline that I'll cut out. And I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just make my patterns. I'll go ahead and outline all of them. Now, here's the thing. On this piece, this is the back. I need to make sure, and I marked it on the back of my pattern. See where it says back? This side up to finished side of leather. That way, when I dry fit it, I mark that on there so I know, and I always check both sides of my patterns when if I make any notes on them. But I know that that side has to be up to the finished side of the leather as I draw this out. And that's where it can get a little confusing, because if not, you think, okay, this is the front of it, of the pattern, and you lay it on the smooth side of the leather and you outline it, you cut it out, next thing you know, it's like, I cut the wrong side of the leather. So what happens is your pattern is going the wrong direction. So what do? You cut another piece of leather, and you learn one of those lessons. So there's my outline for the back. So this would actually go like that. There's the back, there's the front. And then I need to do the spacer. I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and do just like I did on the front. And remember, I made that note on the front of this pattern. It says this side up for spacer. And then on that, what I can do is go back and make 1/4 inch marks around there, and I don't have to cut my pattern up. You can go ahead at this point and cut your pattern and lay it on there and use it, but it's not necessary. And I'll just continue around marking this a 1/4 inch, and I'll show you what I have when I'm done. give you an idea. And I do this a lot when I make patterns too, so that I get the exact spacing that I want on my lines before I cut my pattern out. So there's my 1/4 inch markings all the way around from the outside in. And then I can take my straight edge and I can draw my other line. Now remember, this is going to be a spacer, so it's definitely going to be hidden between the other two pieces of leather, the front and the back. So I'm not super concerned about the ink line. And I probably will not bevel this, because if you bevel your spacer, then you kind of have wavy areas where your leather comes together and gets sewn. So I'll probably leave this square. And you can see some of it I do freehand, like connecting the dots. But if you keep your markings that you measured, if you keep those spaced apart within an inch or so from one another, then it makes it really easy to use your straight edge and connect those, unless you're going around like that at the end. But you can see now how I'll cut that spacer out. So let's go ahead and we'll cut the front. And again, you could use a straight edge. I feel comfortable cutting it freehand with a good sharp knife. And that's the key, is to make sure you cut on that line and that you have a good sharp knife. You can see I'm not even having to go through a second time. It's cutting that leather right off the first pass. Now that may slow down as I start getting, my knife starts getting a little dull. I'll turn that piece of leather around and I'll work my way around that tip, making straight cuts instead of trying to, because it's a pretty tight radius. So I just keep working that piece around and cutting straight cuts until I get around that radius, and then I can make another straight cut all the way down the other side. So you don't have to follow that line with one single cut. Makes it a lot easier, and you don't make a mistake that way, because it's very easy to slip if you're trying to go around a tight radius and make a mistake, and then you got a problem piece of leather there. So there's the front cut out. Let's go to the back. And I'll start out at the top, and I'm kind of making a little plunge cut here, right here, because I don't want to cut to a corner. I want to cut from the corner out, so I don't cut past the corner. So I'll make a little plunge cut with the tip of my blade and then follow that line to the end. My blade is getting a little dull. You can tell because I'm not changing the pressure I'm using, and it's not cutting all the way through like it was. Another plunge cut straight. That gives me a good sharp corner right here. Turn it around. Same thing. Plunge cut. Cut it straight off. And that also doesn't leave any excess leather hanging in this corner, or those corners. Then I can turn that around and cut from the top to the bottom. Now remember, I'm going as slow as I'm comfortable with in order to stay on that line. If you want to use a straight edge, that's not a problem. You can use a straight edge too. I just prefer not to use a straight edge. Again, I'm at the radius, at the tip, so I'm going to work my way around that, making straight cuts, and I'm not taking very much off on each one of those straight cuts, just enough to get around that corner. And I can kind of try to show you here what they look like. So as I go around that corner, I'm making those small cuts, straight cuts, to get around that radius instead of trying to cut around that with one cut. Now I can go back to following my line. And I'll follow that all the way to the end of the back. And there's my back piece. And here's my strap for my belt loop. So here's the front. There's the back. They match because I used the exact same pattern for both. I just flipped it over, and then those two pieces are cut out. Now I need to cut my spacer out. So as long as I cut on those lines, I know my spacer is going to be the correct size and the correct thickness. So I want to stay on those lines as best as I possibly can. So I'm going to cut the outside first. And again, I'm going as slow as I feel comfortable so I can stay on that line. You notice I'm not taking huge wholesale cuts as I move my way down this piece of leather. I'm taking short, manageable cuts. Now on to the end, and you can see my blade starting to get a little dull. I have to go over it there a second time. Now I'll come around that corner just like I did on the other two, using straight cuts to get around that radius. Then I can continue following that line on the outside. Now I'm not going to kid you that when you do these spacers, there's the outside cut. We still need to do the inside. When you do these spacers, when you start cutting this other piece off, it gets a little more difficult. So I'm going to kind of make a little plunge cut at the end, both directions. Now this will be a little more pointed, but you're not going to see it. It's going to be all hidden inside the sheath. So where you'll see it on the outside, it will be rounded right here. But where you see it, you won't see it on the inside. It'll be more pointed where the tip of the blade goes in. And then I want to follow that line up, and again I'm holding this whole piece, but as I cut this spacer out, the leather is going to become more and more flexible, because you're only talking about a piece of 1/4 inch wide leather. So this is going to become very flexible and more difficult to hang on to. So I'll have to turn it around, because I'm left-handed. I'll have to turn it around and cut and hold this piece so I can have something to steady that leather with as I make my cut. Come around that corner, move it a little bit, makes it more comfortable. And again, here's where I don't want to slip and make a bad cut and cut right through my spacer. That would be horrible. And then I'd have to turn around and get another piece of leather, cut my spacer again. Notice how I turned it around to make that final cut there. And then it looks like I'm going to have to plunge right at the tip here. To make sure I get through that. And there, it just released. So there's some scrap. And then I can clean that up if I have any little pieces hanging off of the end there on the inside. So there's my spacer that I'm going to use, and that spacer will get glued to the front and the back, and then it'll be stitched when I stitch the sheath together. And what that does is that allows it definitely stiffens it up, but that allows for that spacing for that knife blade. Let me see if I can grab it. It allows for that spacing of that knife blade to lay inside that sheath, and it also protects the stitches. So if you didn't put a spacer in there and you were forcing this blade in and out of that sheath, eventually it's going to start on the sharp edge, it's going to start cutting your stitching, and then your sheath will fall apart. So there's two reasons for putting that in there. One, it's going to stiffen it up a little bit, make it a nice sturdy sheath, and the other reason is it's going to keep it from cutting the blade from cutting the stitches. So there's my three pieces. There's the back, there's the spacer, and there's the front. I appreciate you coming along today, seeing a finished project that I just completed for a customer, getting started on this knife sheath through the pattern, cutting out our leather, doing a spacer, making sure we put our notes on our pattern so that when we go to cut out our leather, we know we're cutting it on the right side, so that when we marry those together, it comes out right. So I appreciate you watching, and as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.